Today we'll discuss the Protestant Reformation. We'll be guided by three main questions. Number one, what was the Protestant Reformation? Number two, what were the goals and beliefs of the Protestant reformers? And number three, how did the Protestant Reformation spread? Before we get into these questions, let's quickly review some background knowledge. As you know, through the end of the Crusades and into the Renaissance, the Roman Catholic Church was the dominant force in European society. They controlled knowledge, governments, and wealth, large amounts of wealth, which was held in the form of land and gold. At the same time, many Europeans were getting poorer, and with it, they were becoming more frustrated with the church. The result was a revolt within the church, one that led to a permanent split. Some argue that the Great Schism, which took place from 1378 to 1416, was the origin of the Protestant Reformation. The Pope claims to be the living embodiment of God on earth. There can be only one Pope. However, during this time, two men claimed to be Pope. This led to wars, uprisings, and concerns over the legitimacy of the church. People were confused. If there is only one true Pope, one true connection to God, but two men claim to be that person, what if you choose the wrong one? What happens to you in the afterlife if you worship a false idol? The resolution was that both men were kicked out, and that a new pope was chosen by the church leadership. However, many people lost some of their faith during this time. This allowed people to open their mind to new ideas, ideas outside of the church's control. This led to the beginning of things such as the Renaissance and eventually the Protestant Reformation. Later in the 1400s, the Roman Catholic Church began selling indulgences to the faithful. As you've read, indulgences were pardons or forgiveness issued by the Pope that people could buy to reduce a soul's time in purgatory. They are ways to be forgiven for sins that you committed here on earth so that you could ascend to heaven more quickly. These indulgences became a source of greed for the church. Local officials began charging higher prices due to high demand. And these indulgences were sold to pay for big ticket items, things like construction projects and the Crusades. Here you can see a picture of St. Peter's Basilica today. In the top center, you can also see a famous carving called the Pope selling indulgences. And in 1517, Pope Leo X offered indulgences to those who contributed to the rebuild of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. In 1517, Martin Luther hung his 95 Theses on the door of the Castle Church of Wittenberg, Germany. These theses were arguments against indulgences, as well as other corrupt church practices. In Martin Luther's church, some worshippers had purchased indulgences, but he believed that they were forced to pay money for something that was rightfully theirs, as a gift from God. He believed that his worshippers, his fellow worshippers, if they lived a good life, would already leave purgatory in a quick way. He didn't think that they should have to give the church additional money. Martin Luther's theses are a list of protests against the church. This is a really important point. These are a list of protests. He wanted to create a conversation among Catholic intellectuals in Germany about the problems that the church was having and solutions for them. In his theses, he makes three main points. Number one, he argues that selling indulgences to finance the building of St. Peter's is wrong. Number two, he argues that the Pope has no power over purgatory. The leader of the church on earth cannot control what happens in the afterlife. And number three, he believed that buying indulgences gave people a false sense of security and endangered their salvation. In other words, people who bought forgiveness on earth would be more likely to commit more sin. If these indulgences proved to be false, then their salvation would be in danger. They probably would not go to heaven after all. Within 2 weeks, copies of the theses had spread throughout Germany. Within 2 months, they had spread throughout Europe. I hope by now you know that Martin Luther's ideas were spread by the printing press, as you can see in the picture on the top right. Those who followed Martin Luther were called Lutherans. For them, Martin Luther really is their homeboy. His popularity rose quickly, as more Catholics became dissatisfied with the corruption of the Church. But Luther was not the only reformer in Europe at the time. Ulrich Zwingli was a leader of the Reformation in Switzerland. He was a pastor, and he believed that the hierarchy of the Catholic Church was corrupt. He wanted to give church leaders more freedom to do such things as marry. He also thought that fasting during Lent was wrong. Martin Luther rejected his ideas, and Martin Luther was the most popular reformer of the time. So Zwingli's ideas did not take hold, and he was killed in battle in 1531. Another famous reformer was John Calvin, a French pastor. He led what was known as the Calvinist movement. He was a humanist lawyer, and he believed in an idea called predestination, which said that God knows who will be saved even before people are born. Nothing that you do in life, good or bad, will change your destiny. In other words, you're going to heaven or you are going to hell before you are even born. Still, Calvinists followed a really strict behavior code. They had to go to Mass every week. They had to give up dancing, singing, and jewelry. And even the number of courses in their meals and the color of their clothing was regulated. All of this despite the fact that nothing you could do on earth would change your destiny. Let's quickly review. What was the Protestant Reformation? I hope by now you have an answer. The second question, how did the Protestant Reformation start? The third, why did Martin Luther write his 95 Theses? Here are the answers. The Protestant Reformation was a 16th century movement to reform the Catholic Church. It was a protest, hence the word Protestant. It was a protest for change, reform. The Protestant Reformation started with Martin Luther's 95 Theses. These are usually considered to be the inspiration for the Protestant Reformation. However, as we discussed, there were other things that happened earlier that made people lose faith in the church. And finally, why did Martin Luther write his 95 Theses? His intention was to start a debate. It was not to cause trouble nor to embarrass the church. He wanted to encourage people to discuss the wrongs of the Catholic Church and, more importantly, to encourage the church to fix those wrongs. That's the end of our discussion of the Protestant Reformation. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me at any time. Thanks.